Okay, it is officially that time of year in powerlifting. Christmas is past, but the true Christmas for us fans is coming up. Sheffield 2025. We are a week and a half out, where the best in the world face off against each other, champion versus champions, to see who is the most extreme outlier and who can break the world record by the most amount. This is going to be my preview of what we can expect from each of the male lifters at Sheffield, all 12 of them, based on their historic competition results, and also what they've been doing in training. And let me tell you, once we go through the numbers, it's actually closer than a lot of people think. Okay, let's go straight into it. So this is actually this was initially going to be a prediction video, but then I thought in the process of doing that, I collected all these metrics about each lifter, and I thought, well, why not just share the data I've collected, so then you guys can come to your own conclusions and your own predictions and see if we match based on that. I'll do a separate video with my specific predictions off the back of this data, but for now I'll just share these numbers that I've collected. So it's in one place, easy for you guys to make your own predictions on. Okay, so starting off with Waska, there's three things I looked at for each lifter, right? Number one, self-explanatory, their best ever total. For Waska, 638. Number two, their best competition lifts combined. So that's their best ever squat in competition, plus the best ever bench, plus the best ever deadlift. Now for Waska, that just happens to be the same as his best ever total, because the day he hit his best total, he actually PB'd on every single lift. However, for most of the lifters on this list, it's actually not the case. So that's why those are two separate points there. And finally, their best training total. Now there's a few caveats with this. Number one, this is only the training total leading into Sheffield. Okay, so I haven't gone back and looked at the training from previous years. This is literally just their training leading to Sheffield. But the other important caveat is this is based on what the lifter is willing to share publicly, right? So this is all based off each lifter's Instagram page, where some of them are very open and share their top lifts on every single SBD day that they do, whereas other lifters are more private, only share a few sets here and there, and some purposely hide their top sets, right? So this is based on information publicly available. The other caveat with this is some lifters train more sub-maximal than others. So for some lifters, it's harder to extrapolate the numbers they're capable of hitting at Sheffield. But Waska hit a 663 training total. So at the top there, I also have the weight classes in 59s and what the current world record is, which is 669.5, Fedosienko's long-standing world record. So Waska in training has come close, only a few kilos shy of the world record. Now, obviously, he's got to make weight, do it on the platform, but he's getting close to that world record. And at this point, if you're a Waska fan, then it's absolutely not inconceivable that you will see him go for the all-time world record in that weight class. Okay, next up, Shell Backlund. Now, this is the most interesting one. So Shell, for those that don't know, is a 74 lifter who is dropping down to 66 for the first time in his career for Sheffield. And as soon as he announced that and started posting some of his training videos, which we'll get to in a second, everyone thought that he was going to win and he's going to walk away with it. Well, I'm here to tell you that while he still probably is the favorite, it's going to be closer than people think. Right now, 725 is obviously the world record for the 66 weight class. His best ever total and best competition lifts, 815 and 820, which is way, way above. However, these were lifts he did at the 74s. Now, for his training total, I actually have 4 points there. The reason why is Shell has been very open with his training and he's shared pretty much every single SBD day that he's done, as well as his body weight, which has been very helpful for us to see. And it also shows us the trend as he's approaching an unknown weight class. He's never been this light before in his career, a career that's been decades long, right? So it's very interesting to see how his performance does as he drops down in body weight and spends more time in that depleted state. So the first total he did, 825 at just over 70 kilos. This is the one that got everyone freaking out, saying, okay, game over. Everyone else is fighting for second place, right? But then as he's, spent a few more weeks there, you can see his total has gradually dropped. So the next one dropped over 25 kilos. Then he dropped over another 20 kilos. And that 775 total that he did, which was a few weeks ago now, that's the one that made me think, you know what, it's going to be closer than people think. Because that 775 was actually the most difficult one of the lot. And I thought, he hasn't lost that much body weight from when he did just under 800. And he's lost over 20 kilos on that SBD day. The lifts looked harder. So the predominant factor there is the time that he's spending in a depleted state, in a deficit to cut. And those people that have cut to a relatively lean, borderline single digit body fat state, which is what Shell must be approaching now, those people will know that the longer you spend depleted, the harder it is to maintain strength, right? So that's where I thought, well, with Shell, we're looking at closer to a mid 700s total based on that trend. However, his most recent SBD day, his top lifts he posted was 785, 68 body weight, and those lifts actually looked easier than the 775. So I guess he might have just had a worse day on that SBD there. So he's still definitely the favorite with that 785 training total, but I don't think he's going to hit the 800 that people were talking about initially. And Kasim Sand is not that far away. So Kasim Sand obviously had the previous world record of 710.5. However, his best training total that he's put together this training cycle leading to Sheffield is 765, right? Which has been kind of almost under the radar because Shell has obviously dominated the headlines in the 66s and everyone's talking about him. But Kasim Sen quietly has put like 50 kilos on his total in training, which is kind of crazy. Now, his last SBD day in total that he did was 755 with pretty slow grindy lifts like touch and go, grinder bench, and he did the deadlift with straps, right? However, he did do a squat that was 10 kilos heavier a few weeks back, so I included that all in his best lifts. The reason I didn't separate it by like date and specific SBD days like Shell is because with Shell, I think it's more important to do that considering he's dropping down to an unknown weight class that we haven't seen him compete at before. Whereas Kasim San has been a lifelong 66 and he's not one of those 66s that has big cuts to do. So his performance can be pretty predictable, I feel. And yeah, if you compare Shell's 785, Kasim San's 765, it's only a 20 kilo difference. And yes, Shell's 785 looked easier, but it could very well come down to just one lift or one missed attempt between the two of them. It's a lot closer between Shell and Kasim Sen than people think it is. And I haven't heard anyone say that because everyone's saying Shell's going to dominate, which he very well could, but it is close. It is close. Now, speaking of 66s that do cut a lot, we have Panna, who was the reserve, and it turns out he's competing because Tim Monagatti, one of the 83s, had to withdraw. Now, I'm not going to talk about whether or not Panna was the most deserving reserve ahead of guys like Jonathan Garcia, Anatoly, Gavin Aiden, but the fact is he's competing, and it's always entertaining to see him compete. So his best total and best comp lifts, I've taken his numbers as a 66. I know he's done a few meets as a light 74 where he hasn't done the final stages of his water cut, where he's posted bigger totals. Most recently, his 730 that he did as a 69 point something kilo lifter. But these are his best numbers as a 66. Now, his training total leading into this Sheffield is 743.5. Now, I think the thing with Panna is we've seen Panna put up numbers like this in the gym heaps in the past, right? We've seen him in the 730s, around 740 for his training totals. And he seems to be someone that's really affected by the last few kilos off that weight cut. And in competition, he's, low 700s typically, high sixes, low sevens as a 66 lifter. So, yeah, I think with Kasim Sands' numbers being bigger in training, we haven't seen train totals that big from him before, whereas for Panna we have. And yes, he's looking stronger, but is he going to be on the level of Kasim Sand and Shell at Sheffield? I don't know, but those are his numbers, so you can make your predictions. I'm going to have my specific predictions, like I said, coming up. I'm going to predict the numbers for each of them in a separate video. Okay, on to the 74s, Perk. So you can see there his best total and best competition lifts above his own world record that he set. His best training total leading into this Sheffield, 860.5. However, that includes a squat double. So the heaviest squat we've seen from him this prep has been a set of 2 that he did. And he's looking in a pretty good position to take that world record for a ride, even though he had to already up it pretty significantly at Worlds to beat Shell. That was Shell's 40 chest move to make Perk up the world record and then drop to 66 and be the favorite for Sheffield. But yeah, again, Perk is someone who was talked about like last year before Shell's resurgence breaking the 74 record, as someone who was going to steamroll and dominate Sheffield because it was way above. He did 851 at a time when the IPF world record was 790.5, which percentage wise, ridiculous, right? Now this year, people aren't talking about him as much because, like I said, Shell has been dominating headlines, but Perk is almost under the radar now, and I think looking at that training total, he's definitely one of the favorites still for me. Strong podium favorites. Speaking of potential strong podium favorites, 83 Russ. So obviously 861 is the number they're chasing. Best lifts there. You can see his best training total has been 882.5. Now, Russ is another guy who has put together a lot of big training totals in the past at a higher body weight, and he has to cut, and we see his performances on the platform pretty significantly lower, so almost similar to Panna in that respect. So apparently the difference this prep is he's been lighter in training. So he's kept his body weight a bit lower than usual, closer to his weight class weight. So then information we can take from that is he's more likely to replicate his training numbers this time around. So 882.5 is his training total that we've seen. And yeah, that's a pretty significant jump on the world record. And again, that puts him right up there in the conversation. However, he's got a battle in his hands in the 83s. So current world champ, Durans. So his best ever total, 850. Now, Durans is a lifter who, unlike some of the others on this list, doesn't really post about his top sets as much in training. We've seen a 315 PB squat. That was a few months ago now, which is 2.5 above his competition best, I believe. But aside from that, he hasn't really shown us the top lifts. And I believe he trains more submaximal anyway, and he does a lot of rep work rather than really heavy singles like guys like Panna and Russ do. But it'll be interesting to see what package Durans brings, especially considering he's going to have the hometown advantage, right? It's going to be in the UK. And speaking of hometown advantage, the other 83 is also UK lifter, the current official world record holder, Ade. And yeah, again, pretty limited data on him because he's 861. Every single lift was a pretty big PB on that day, so he's obviously developing pretty quick. So we can only assume his numbers are higher. Best training total, again, kind of similar to Durans. We typically see more rep work from him and or him not posting his top singles doubles. So we don't really know where he's at, although presumably being the youngest and most recently emerged 83, having made massive improvements, reasonable to assume he's probably potentially bringing the most improved package out of the 83s, which instantly makes him a favorite, or maybe not favorite, but in contention for being one of the lifters to consider taking it all. On to the 93s, Gustav Hedlund, the defending champion. So best competition lifts is pretty much where the current world record is at 901. And Gustav is probably the biggest example of someone who trains quite submaximal. So that being said, I've still seen lifts from him this prep that are heavier than what I've usually seen from him. So we've seen him take a squat like 310, bench off around 210, deadlift off like 330, which is still, a solid 10 to 20 kilos off of his competition best on each lift. However, that is, I believe, heavier than I've seen him typically do in prep. Kind of hard to extrapolate someone who trains very submaximally like Gustav, but I mean, we all counted him out last year. No one predicted Gustav to win or even podium. But I believe that, he very well could surprise us again this year. His 93 rival, though, is going to be going up against is one of the wildcards, Emil Krastev, who also has been looking very strong in training. So his best training total has been 900. We saw an 885 SBD day recently. However, he had a heavier bench and deadlift on another day a few weeks back. He also posted a 355 deadlift PB, which I believe actually makes that training total 905. He literally just posted that to Instagram like a few hours ago. So yeah, it was interesting last year, Emil Krastev, around the time of Sheffield last year when he wasn't invited, he did an SBD day and he put up like a 906 or 908 in the gym just to kind of send a message to the rest of the 83s. It looks like he's around a similar level now, 905 training total. And Obviously, he was very close to 905 at Worlds. Last deadlift just slipped from his fingers at lockout. So he's obviously capable, and it'll be interesting to see if he can put that on the platform at Sheffield. 105 Ashton Ruska. Now, here is probably my biggest dark horse for Sheffield. I don't know why, I haven't heard a single person talk about Ashton Ruska and what he's capable of doing at Sheffield. 940.5 is the IPF record. His best total that he's done is 968, and his best competition lifts combined gives him almost 980, right? So if we see an Ash who's, PB level on all his lifts, we're looking at someone who's close to almost 1,000 kilos, which is pretty significantly above 104%. Need I remind you that last year Gustav won Sheffield, breaking the world record by, I believe, 7 kilos, so 101% or 100 point something percent. So it might not take that much to win. And Ash is definitely capable. Now, training total wise, apparently Ash was injured a few weeks back, and so he wasn't really training heavy. However, he's recovered. He's starting to pick training back up, and we haven't seen super heavy lifts from him by his standards anyway. I mean, he's still repping over 700 pounds in squats and deads, but we haven't seen him take any lifts near his competition numbers. But I believe Ash trains pretty submaximal most of the time as well. So again, make that what you will, but Ash just always has a way of coming out on top. I remember he was being absolutely overridden, or people were looking past him at US Nationals in 2023 in USAPL when he was going head to head against Keenan Lee and Bob Matthews. And Ash came out on top, totaled a PB 968 to beat them. And yeah, I think he's very, very capable of putting up something big at Sheffield. He's 100% my dark horse. For some reason, everyone's overlooking him. Keep your eye out on what Ashton Ruska can do. I mean, look at those numbers. They kind of speak for themselves. And finally, we have Jesus Olivares, 120 plus. So 1152.5, obviously the benchmark he set in the first Sheffield when he won. His best training lifts we've seen from him is 5 kilos above that. And apparently he's lost a solid bit over 10 kilos in body weight for health reasons. And we recently saw a 1,000-pound squat from him, so 455 kilos, which was quite difficult. One of the biggest grinders I've seen him do. We don't see much of his bench in training. We have seen a 600-pound bench, which equals his competition max. So he looks like his squat may be a bit down. However, with the big guys, they obviously peak pretty strong. So he'll probably still take a run in his world record squat. And his deadlifts are looking very, very, very strong. We've seen a number of deadlifts from him in prep now where he's lifting over the IPF record of 411. We've seen 412.5. 415, we've seen 420, I believe, has been the most. And those deadlifts are looking real solid. Typically, Jesus has like grip / soft knees issues at lockout with his top end deadlifts. He's looked pretty solid with his 400 plus pulls in training. So I believe he's coming in at peak deadlift, potentially bench strength, and we'll see what he can do on squats. But there you have it, Jesus. And again, it's interesting because take it back to last year's Sheffield. Jesus was the heavy favorite. Everyone, and I mean everyone, was picking Jesus to win Sheffield last year. Obviously, he didn't quite have the meet that he wanted. Finished in 10th, I believe. This year, again, no one's talking about him. All the hype is on the lower weight classes with Shell, Kasim Sand, Perk, the 83s. And guys like Ash and Jesus, no one seems to be talking about them. People forget, last year in prep for Sheffield, Jesus was putting up numbers close to 1,200 in the gym. That's why everyone had him as heavy favorite. So can't count the big man out. And one thing's for sure, he is going to have the last say on his deadlift, regardless of what it is. The man will load whatever it takes to to pull himself into the lead. We saw him load up a 429 third deadlift last year. Obviously didn't get it, but can't count him out till the competition is fully complete. There you have it. There is the preview for Sheffield. Let me know what you think, where predictions are based on this information. And in a few days, I'm going to be dropping my predictions video where I'm going to have 7 specific predictions, which include actual numbers and forecasts and who I think is going to win, what the exact podium is going to be. So stay tuned for that. That'll be my predictions from all this info. and then you can compare and see how much you agree or disagree with me.